Well, welcome to our afternoon session on, well, it's almost afternoon, but on the UN delegates and observers. It's a meeting that we are doing in public here in the theater, and there are going to be a few speakers here. We're going to have about 4 or 5 speakers. First, we're going to hear from Natalie Ricard about the scope and working methods of the COPOS and its subcommittees. And then we're going to hear from Piero Benvenuti, and he's going to talk about past and future IAU actions at the Science and Technology Subcommittee, which is part of COPOS. And then we'll hear from Mila Francisco on the Group of Friends initiative. And I guess Jose Manuel Arizola is also participating in that. And then the last one's from Federico, or the second to last one's from Federico, on the ITU coordination in lieu of Tim Stevenson, who had to leave early. And then Ashley Vanderlei is going to talk about correlated national actions. And in this case, it's from the US, FCC, and the NSF, the National Science Foundation. And afterwards, hopefully, if we have enough time, we'll have some questions and answers. Okay, so first up, Natalie. You see this?
Thank you very much, Connie. Thank you very much to all the organizers, and good morning and good afternoon and good evening to all the people online. We'll have the privilege to try to explain COPOS and IAUS in about 10 minutes, so I'll try my best. So first, I would like to clarify the difference, because sometimes people tend to mix a little bit, but we have two different things. On the left, you have the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. This is a committee that has a technical subcommittee, a legal subcommittee, and it reports to the UN General Assembly. And this means these are the member states. It's a group of member states, COPOS. Then on the left-hand side, you have the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, which is where I am working. And we are part of the United Nations Secretariat, which means de facto, we report through various committees, but we report to the UN Secretary General, and our director reports directly to the UN Secretary General on space matters. Now, just very briefly, a few words about the UN Office of Outer Space Affairs. So why am I actually standing here? Because on one side, we are doing the secretariat for the committee, but on the other side, we also do capacity building activity. What we mean by this is mostly conferences, workshop, training, any sort of activities which is to increase the use of space or space application technology around the world. We have a variety of programs. I'm not going to go into the detail. You can find plenty of details about this. But one important point was that we were organizing together with Spain and the International Astronomical Union the Dark and Quiet Sky conferences that took place, unfortunately not at La Palma, but online in the last couple of years. So now, just brief overview, the office is really a few people. I'm on the space application section, so please come and talk to me for any use of space, for benefits here on Earth. And I can also lead you to interfaces with some of my colleagues if you so wish. Now, a few words about the committee. So again, the committee, this is really the group of member states. Historically, I will not go into all the detail, but it was started in 1958. It was established by a UN General Assembly resolution in 1959. And this has really been the body that brought forward all the various, let's say, major elements in international space law. So the treaties, in particular the outer space treaties, but also since the 1980s, rather principles, resolution, guidelines, etc. One of the elements, for instance, which is still being worked on is all the guidelines on the long-term sustainability of outer space. Now, COPOS today has 102 member states. As you can see, it's been really increasing steadily. This does not represent all the member states of the United Nations, but still it's a very significant increase, in particular in the last few years. In addition to all the member states that you can see on the list, we also have observers such as the IAU or SKAO, etc. So then those entities are invited to observe the meeting. COPOS reports to the General Assembly through a committee. And just a few words on the structure. So the main body, the committee, has two subcommittees, the scientific and technical subcommittee that meets 2 weeks every year in January, February. The legal subcommittee, similarly, 2 weeks, March, April every year, while COPUOS meets in May, June for a week and a half. What you see on the right-hand side here is what we call the bureau, which is a French word, but that means essentially the people who make the committee functions. And these are positions which are changing. And there is a rotation between the different regions of the world. So the people that you see on that slide were in these various positions for the cycle 2022-2023. And for the next 2 years, 2024-2025, there's going to be changes in the people that will be members of the bureau. And as you can see, we already can anticipate what will happen in the next cycle, 2026 to 2027. Why that matters? Because these are the people who can really provide you detailed information on what is happening. They prepare the meetings together, etc. The agenda, as you can see, is quite broad. There is a very large number of agenda items. I've put dark and quiet skies and large constellation here on the bottom left. This has been discussed. Of course, the question now is, will there be an agenda item at the next meeting? So I just brought here the exact text of the COPUOS report from June 2023. And if we look at it, it's quite specific. So the committee requested the subcommittee to consider under the agenda item of future role and method of work of the committee, which is essentially when you decide the agenda for next year, the scope, the duration, and the title of an agenda items related to dark and quiet skies and large constellations. Now, what that means is the scope, the duration, and the title of such an agenda item will be discussed in the agenda of the subcommittee that addresses the future role and method of work of the committee. And incidentally, this is an agenda item where it's member states who have a say. Now, I'm not going to go into more detail there. I believe other speakers would explain this and how we came to this. But what I wanted to explain is how could various stakeholders get involved. It all depends on who you are. If you are a member state, if you are a government, if your country is not currently a state member of the committee, please join. If you would like to know how to go ahead, please come and talk to me, and then you will see the process to be able to become a full member of the committee. There is also a procedure to follow if you would like to become an observer, if you are an international entity and you would like to become an observer in the committee. Now, there are subcommittees, technical and legal, and each of those has 3 working groups. Why does it matter? Because some of those working groups might want to consider the topic of dark and quiet skies. So I just give you a few examples. The working group of the whole is the working group that is in charge of deliberating on the future role and method of work of the committee. So when we were talking about there is a need to discuss the scope, the duration of an agenda item, first, it would be discussed within this working group. Then there is also a working group on the long-term sustainability of outer space activities. There had been discussion in the committee previously that maybe the topic of dark and quiet skies should be linked to the topic of sustainability of outer space activities. Here as well, the discussions are taking place first in a working group. Then in the legal subcommittee, there are also 3 working groups, and one of them is about the status and the application of the treaties. So I hear a lot of discussion about interpretation of the treaty. Well, there is a working group which is discussing this kind of matters. Finally, this is the kind of slide that my colleagues who interface with member states are showing to explain what can be done in the committee itself. What you will notice here is this is really targeting member states. It's talking about ministers, talking about the government level. Then what can also be done is to interface with the committee through the processes that are in place, for instance, to review existing documents. The Space 2030 agenda is one of the fundamental documents that has been adopted by the General Assembly, and there will be a midterm review in 2025. So maybe the topic of dark and quiet skies could somehow fall under the discussion that take place on the 2030 agenda. Maybe it could also fall under the discussions under the long-term sustainability of outer space. So I'm just essentially trying to show various options, various possibilities on how to engage with the committee. Another one to consider is there are two subcommittees, but there are also tools and ways of working to have the two subcommittees complement each other, the scientific and technical aspect on one side and the legal aspect on the other side. And this, for instance, was done on the space debris topic. And finally, I just wanted to give you a concrete example of a topic which was quite successful in achieving the goal that they had set up to get through the committee. So it's about space and global health. The topic became relevant, as you can see, already a very long time ago in the committee, but then they started an action team 20 years ago. Then they created an expert group in 2014. That was then discussed in Unispace, one of our major conferences in 2016. And in 2018, then they created an agenda item in STSC, so the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee, and they created a working group. And by 2022, what this working group produced was a draft resolution that was then adopted by IAUS, and that was then provided up to the General Assembly. And this resolution 77/120 was adopted in 2022 by the General Assembly. And that led this group working on global health to then create a network, create a platform. Now we're going to have a conference next month. So I just wanted to show you this as a very concrete example of what can be achieved by working with the committee. Of course, the key question is, what do you want to obtain? Do you want to have an expert group? Do you just want to raise awareness? Do you want to have a resolution adopted by the General Assembly? You probably might want to follow various paths. You might have various options on the table. But indeed, you probably would need to first actually define clearly what it is that you want to obtain from the committee, because then you can define the mechanism by which you could make this happen. These are the dates for next year. So the scientific subcommittee takes place starting on the 29th of January. It will be an in-person event in Vienna, so we are not having participation online anymore. We will, of course, have the broadcast online for information. This remains there. Incidentally, we also provide the recording. The audio recording are always available also on our website. But if you want to participate in the committee as a member state, you need to be there in person. If you have any specific questions, then please feel free to ask me or feel free to ask any of my colleagues. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a diplomat, I'm an engineer, but I will be happy to help. Thank you very much.
So we are going to hold questions to the end. We're going to allow our speakers to speak first. And the next two on our list is Piero Benvenuti. Piero.
For a change, I do not have slides. I will just talk about what the IAU has done in connection with our role of a permanent observer in the COPUS committee. Just a bit of history. I got involved in COPUS when I became General Secretary of the IAU in 2015, and I replaced my predecessor, Karel van der Hoekt. At that time, the main reason for the IAU to intervene in the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee and COPUS was about the near-Earth object and the observation and the campaign of observing close by asteroids that may become dangerous. And that was an obvious thing that the IAU could do. Then we considered within the IAU the protection of the sky from light pollution. And I knew that there was past action with UNESCO about that. And so I contacted UNESCO and see how this can be improved, and if UNESCO was ready to make action in terms of protecting the sky from light pollution. And I found that they were a bit reluctant to do so. They were ready, and in fact, they do so in protecting a historical site or astronomical observations. And they have a long cycle to, to be declared a World Heritage site for astronomy. But they said very clearly that they considered the sky outside their jurisdiction, and so they couldn't do any real action on that. At that point, I approached the director of UNOS at the time, Simonetta Di Pippo, and say, why don't we bring the case of the protection of the sky to the remit of COPUOS? And she was quite enthusiastic about that. I mean, Simonetta is an astrophysicist, so was very sensitive to the point. So we started there, but that was well before we had the threat of the constellation. We started proceeding with that slowly, and then in 2019, as you know, the first launch of Starlink satellite was there, and so we immediately reacted to that, predicting that that would be something very impacting on astronomy. And so our presence in COPUOS as IAU changed dramatically, and we started in 2020 at the meeting, the 57th meeting of the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee, presenting a technical presentation, which the purpose of which was just to raise the attention of the COP of the STC to the problem that the constellation could represent for astronomy. Just for your information, a technical presentation is what the words say. The difference with other documents in the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee is that they are not presented to the entire assembly, to the entire the main session of the committee. So the participation to the presentation of technical presentation is at will. So depending on the subject, you may or may not assist. That was followed in the year after, in 2021, with the presentation of a conference room paper with the support of a number of delegations: Chile, Ethiopia, Jordan, Slovakia, Spain, and of course the IAU as observer, ESO, and SKO. And that was elaborating on the threat that the constellation would make to astronomy, and again was raising the attention. And at that time, that was presented under a generic agenda item, which was the general exchange of views, which is a catch-on agenda item where every delegation can say what they wish about the activity in their country. And so it's not, I mean, to be frank, and with all respect to the committee, normally is a lot of rather boring presentation. So it's not very, very well attended. And there we propose, in fact, that we should have a specific agenda item. We got positive reaction by about 18 delegations. And indeed, they gave support to the fact that we should have a specific agenda item, which happened the following year. So at the 59th meeting of the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee in 2022, we presented a working paper, which is a bit more than a conference room paper, with the support of Austria, Chile, the Dominican Republic, Slovakia, Spain, IAU, ESO, and SKO. We had more intervention there because we had a specific agenda item. 25 delegations intervened under the specific agenda item. And of course, that has more relevance. In fact, in the report of that committee, of the Scientific and Technical Committee, there is a very important point, which I raised and I quoted the other day, and that is the fact that astronomy was recognized, and is in that way written in the report, as instrumental to all space activity. And therefore, the protection of astronomy falls within the remit of the STC and COPUOS. I think that is a very important point. the old intervention recognized the impact of the constellation was a serious issue, and that to be continued the discussion. And there was an encouragement to proceed with the discussion with all stakeholders. And at that point, it was also announced that the IAU has set up the Center for the Protection of the Dark and Quiet Sky, and so that was recognized as a positive point. Finally, we arrive at this year in at the STC and COPOS of this year, where we had a specific agenda item, and there with and again, a number of delegations, in particular, Chile was leading and Spain, we made very specific proposal. We think that this agenda item should continue for the, at least for the next 3 years. Incidentally, the reason why it's so complicated to have the delegation accepting a new agenda item is that the agenda of this meeting is really very, very busy. And once an agenda item is approved formally, it's very difficult to delete it, I learned. And so there is a reluctance to accept a new agenda item if an old one is not removed, which is equally complicated in the mechanism because you have to have consensus, as we have already learned. And so it's just enough that one delegation is opposing to a change in the agenda that the proposal is blocked. So just for your information, how difficult it is to continue with that. But the proposal was very logical, in my opinion, just to say we would like to keep this agenda item at least for the next 3 years, or alternatively, to have it approved every year as long as it is useful to have it. And we were also proposing to create an expert group, which would then collect all the people appointed by delegation to discuss, to continue the discussion about the mitigating measures, essentially what the CPS is doing, but at the level of the UN STC. We, in the corridor of the meeting, we found that this second proposal to have an expert group would have encountered some difficulties. And so, considering that the CPS is doing exactly what the role of this expert group would be, we said, okay, we can, we will not push for this second one, but we want really to have the agenda item because that will give enough room in the discussion for bringing up the problem, the issues that we are encountering. And then we started a long discussion about the title of the agenda item. And the reason why this was difficult is because the constellation, in particular Starlink, actually only Starlink, is now reaching a point where there are some geopolitical discussion. To be quite clear, the Russian delegation is very much against Starlink because it's giving support to Ukraine in connecting to internet. Similarly, Iran is very opposing to Starlink because it gives access to the Iranian population directly to internet without the possibility for the Iranian government to control that. And that was said very explicitly during the meeting. So you could understand why it was so difficult to reach agreement. The point is that both Russia and Iran wanted to have a title which was going well beyond the protection of the dark and quiet sky. And it was really, politically charged. And we don't want to have our scientific purpose used or misused for political reasons. So we try very hard, and thanks to the intervention of the delegation of South Africa, which has very good relation with Russia, in the end, at the last meeting, the last session of the meeting, Russia was amenable to a reasonable title of the agenda item, but Iran refused to accept that. So we left with what Nathalie has shown, that This matter will be rediscussed, but at the moment, we do not have a specific agenda item in the next STC. That does mean that we will not present, together with the friendly delegation that are supporting us, all the possible action in the meeting. The point is, we will not have a specific agenda item where other delegations can discuss. So that is the situation at the moment. So about the future plan, well, I must say that at the last meeting of COP was exactly because of the difficulties, I think, we had almost 50 delegations speaking in favor of maintaining the attention about the problem. And that was very successful. I mean, the visibility of the problem now is very, very high. Although, as I said, the discussion is difficult because of this very hard geopolitical situation. Anyway, after the meeting, we start discussing, particularly with the Chile delegation and the Spanish delegation, and to some extent with the South African delegation, about the possibility of an external action that would take advantage of the positive support that we have by so many delegations. And so we launched, well, Chile and Spain has launched an initiative which is called the Group of Friends. Group of Friends is not a new thing. There are other examples in the history of the STC. Is a group of delegations that agree to work together to coordinate their action externally to the. There is no formal definition within the STC and COPOS, but it is just a friendly group that agree to discuss and coordinate action for the future meeting. So that will be now presented by Mila and Jose Manuel Arrazola, Mila Francisco, who is here, and Manuel is connecting remotely, and they will present the terms of reference of this group of friends that will be discussed actually in the closed session this afternoon. We already had a number of delegations that has agreed to join the group of friends. And of course, is open to any delegation who want to join at any time. So I'm expecting that this will grow. And the advantage to have that is that we have a very well-defined group of delegations supporting us, and we will then coordinate the action. I'm sure that we will discuss this afternoon how to take advantage of this group and prepare the action that we want to put on the next STC in February. Certainly, I expect that we should have, at least from the IAU point of view and CPS supporting it, a technical presentation about the main outcome of this conference, which I think is quite interesting to show in all the 4 areas of our activity. But in addition to that, we may have other action that we could coordinate with the delegations. So I think that I stop here, and I think that then Mila and Jose Manuel will explain in more detail the group of friends.
Yes, as Piero said, Mila is our next speaker, and I have to emphasize that she is the UN delegate from Chile to Vienna, basically. And so we're very pleased to have her with us, and she'll talk about the group of friends.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. It's a pleasure being here. As Piero already said, my name is Mila Francisco. I work for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Chile, and I am delegate to, among other organizations, to UN COPUS. I work there with my counterpart and dear colleague, Jose Manuel Ramirez from Spain. We have been working on this for a while, and he will start with this presentation that we have put together. And then I will will come again and explain a bit further how this group of friends, or how we see this group of friends working. Jose Manuel.
Thank you very much, Mila. Good afternoon to all of you. It is my pleasure to be here today not here, but here. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you this
Ay,
morning.
ahí estás.
I really regret it, but I'm happy that we can discuss about.
Wait a moment because the audio, José Manuel,
It's not
no se
working?
escucha todavía. Espera un poco. Ahora, José Manuel. Ver.
Thank you, Mila.
No, igual, a ver un poco más fuerte.
Thank you, Mila. Can you hear me
No.
now? I don't know if you can hear me. Okay, I think you can hear me. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you. It's my pleasure to be here with you this morning. Obviously, I would like to be in the Canary Islands, not here in Vienna. But
Sorry, Jose,
unfortunately-
please wait another minute.
Okay.
We will make a short change of. Sí, vamos a cambiar. José Manuel va a presentar primero Federico y después tú, para que se arregle lo del audio.
Perfecto. Gracias.
So, well, sorry, Jose Manuel. Nice to see you, at least. This is Federico. We are going to swap presentations. So I'm going to talk the ITU one while we try to solve the audio issue. Okay, so let's go into the ITU part now. All right. Okay, there. If you can, oh, okay, I think it's okay. What's there? There it is. All right, so yeah. Okay, so we've been discussing COPWOS and what COPWOS can do. And it was an idea of us to try to also explain to you how we work in the ITU, especially from the point of view of spectrum management and what things we do and how maybe there's an interaction with COPWOS and the work's been done in COPWOS. So just to start, many people showed this already, right? The table of frequency allocations, in particular, the United States, this is easy to see, right? All these little colors in there are different services using different parts of the radio spectrum. So if you think on the difference between optical and radio astronomy, is that radio astronomy has to share the spectrum with many, many, many different uses of the spectrum. So you see, there we are, radio astronomy, but there are many bands that are shared. So we have to share even the band. We have other services adjacent to our bands. So this is a difficult situation we have to navigate day by day. And of course, the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, regulates the use of the radio spectrum at the international level. Veronique already talked to you about the radio regulations. I'm not doing that again, but I will just say that the radio regulations define the definition, the principles, and the rules for the international use of the radio spectrum. One important thing is that the use of the radio spectrum at the national level is the responsibility of the National Radio Administration, right? So the radio regulations are then adapted at the national level. And the radio regulations, the interesting thing is that it's an international text that is updated every 3 to 4 years. So every 3 to 4 years, we meet around 4,000 people during 4 weeks to define the changes in a 450 pages document that is an international treaty. Right, so you can see here, this was the WRC 19 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and now we are very close to starting the WRC 23 in Dubai for 4 weeks in Dubai, yes. Many people can think that's nice to be there for 4 weeks. It's not that nice because you're just locked down in a meeting room from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. at night. So what we will have there in Dubai is many standing agenda items. So there are things that every 4 years are revised, like the terminology, inconsistencies, things about satellite filings, but also new agenda items that were defined in WRC 19. We've been working on those agenda items since 3 years ago. And we will also discuss the new agenda items that will start after WRC 19. Right? So you see that the ITU has a very structured way of working. All right, so how does the ITU really works, right? So I want to participate in the ITU, and how do I do it? So the ITU is, of course, we can discuss on how to become a member and so on if you're interested, but I would like to just show you how we work. And the ITU is input document driven, right? So we prepare documents and we send them to the different groups. And you can see here, this is the kind of tables we see for input documents, where you have the names of the documents and you can download the document there. And I'll try to explain a little bit how this works. Right? So how the process works in the ITU. In the ITU, we have what Veronique was talking about yesterday, the working parties and the study groups. So for example, in a working party, the process starts by a proposal from any stakeholder. It can be a member state, or it can be a sector member. For example, radio communication sector, a sector member, which is the equivalent of a permanent observer in COPUOS, more or less. Right? Allow me. So there's a submission of a document 1 week before the meeting starts. So that's the deadline. And then during the meeting, there are discussions and drafting groups on those documents, right? So we can have in the order of 20, 30, 50, 100 documents per meeting. And all those documents are discussed in the meeting. Some of them are finalized, some not. So when it's not finalized, it just gets carried over to the next meeting. So following meeting, discuss again. You can sometimes liaise to some other group, right? There are 6 study groups in the ITU, and each study group has about 4 working parties. So you can liaise to another working party saying what we are doing in working party 7D is something you should be aware of. For example, if we work on something on satellites, we let know working party 4A or working party 4C, depending on which type of satellites we're working on. And we tell them, we are working on this, you might be interested. Right, so these are liaison statements. And then you keep working, and probably, if you're lucky, in about 3, 4, 5 meetings, you finish your document, you elevate it to the study group, and then it is approved at the study group, where in the study group it is translated into the 6 UN languages with simultaneous translation. So in there, we open the document again, hopefully not that much, because study groups are much larger meetings, and in there it's approved, and it's sent to the Radio Communication Assembly for approval. So this is how the study groups work, right? We have this 4-year cycle. And in the 4-year cycles, what we do is we work with agenda items. And now how an agenda item is formed, right? Agenda items need to be formally accepted previous to the WRC. All right. Agenda items need consensus by the 193 member states. So WRC 23 will define the agenda items for WRC 27. And agenda items can be proposed by regional groups like Asia Pacific or Europe, or member states. Agenda items cannot be proposed by sector members, right? So us as the SKU, CRAFT, the people we work on this, from the radio astronomy community, we cannot propose agenda items. So we have to liaise and we have to work with our administrations, with regional groups to try to convince them to put an agenda item to protect radio astronomy, for example. Right, and the scope of the agenda items, of course, need to be very clear and defined, and very important, we need to make sure that it's feasible to complete in 3 to 4 years. Right, so at the moment, we are working on that, right? This is the part that's missing in the connection with a little bit on Policy Hub, that we're trying to get spectrum management to interact more with Policy Hub and explain what we do in spectrum management. So at the moment, there's a lot of work to try to get an agenda item to protect radio astronomy from large constellations at the WRC 27. So if we get that done now at 23, it will go into the study cycle to 27. There are 2 proposals, one from the Africa Telecommunication Union and one from the CEPT. CEPT is the European Regional Group. And if one of these is approved, or if one is approved, it will be the first time in decades that we have an agenda item for radio astronomy, right? Having an agenda item is a very, very difficult thing. And here I just put some short description of what the A2 proposal is doing. Is focusing on the protection of radio quiet zones, and CEPT is having something similar, but not so focused on radio quiet zones because there are no radio quiet zones in Europe. And it's also worth noting that CTEL is the American Radio Spectrum Regional Group, is also preparing a proposal on registration of radio quiet zones in the ITU. And this proposal is a little bit different. It's going to be to go to the Radio Communication Assembly and not to the WRC because it has a different mechanics. But the proposal is to be able to register radio quiet zones in the ITU. Remember when we were talking about radio quiet zones that they work only at the national level, right? So these proposals are trying to change that in some way. All right, let me just try to speed up a little bit. So those were agenda items, right? Those are really, really big things that will eventually, if you're successful, will change the radio regulations. But also there are many other activities that we do at the ITU, right? For example, right now in Working Party 7D, which is happening at the same time we are here, Working Party 7D is for radio astronomy. We had a document from the Radio Communication Bureau describing activity in the filings of non-GSO, non-geostationary satellites with the moon as a reference body, right? So there's been a big increase in filings with the moon as a reference body, right? So that's what we've been discussing before, right? How the activity in the moon is increasing. We are starting a report on radio astronomy from the moon in Working Party 7D. And also we are discussing some other things, like unintended electromagnetic radiation from large satellite constellations. This is what Kes Basa was presenting here. We are talking about the different frequency bands of interest to radio astronomy. We are talking about protection for VGOS. We also discussed VGOS here. And many other things, like, for example, protection of IMT. IMT is the ITU name for cell phones. This is just to try to explain that satellites are not the only threat that spectrum management works with, right? So in Europe, for example, where there's a lot of population, IMT, cell phone towers, do a lot of damage also to radio astronomy. So we work on that also. And that's would be it. I hope you have a little bit of more a sense of what the ITU does, and hopefully we can find a way to have this communication line between the ITU and COPWOS. It is very clear that they deal with very different things, but in this particular challenge of the satellite constellations, we are really convinced that there needs to be a connection between what the ITU can do to protect the radio spectrum and to discuss the use of the orbits, and what COPWOS do on the peaceful uses of outer space. So just to say thank you very much, and special thanks to Veronique and to Benjamin Winkle for helping in producing these slides. Thank you.
Sorry, just to test the audio.
I think we have sorted out the sound problem,
No,
so we're
it's not
gonna
working.
invite Mila to come on board again, and then Jose Manuel Francisco. Could we have him on the screen too, please? I don't see him just yet.
Testing.
Ya, José Manuel, estás a la vista. A ver. Habla.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's my pleasure to be with all you this afternoon. I'm very pleased to be invited to take part on this important symposium, and I really appreciate the job that the International Astronomical Union and specifically Piero Benvenuti is doing to raise awareness about the importance of dark and quiet skies for science and society. For me, it's also very important to be working hand by hand with Mila Francisco, my Chilean colleague. As Piero has explained before, sometimes our meetings at COPUOS are affected by the geopolitical situation. But on the other side, I have to say that it's a very interesting job. And we have achieved together, Mila and me, and with the support of many other delegates, important results and great success. And I have to say that Mila and me have the same vision. And every time we have to face a problem, what we really see is an opportunity. And for me, and for Mila, I think it's also true, it's a great opportunity to be here today explaining what we are doing in COPUOS and what we are planning to do next. So I appreciate very much what Piero has said before of me. And the only thing is I would like to make some comment. Piero, you were saying that COPUOS can be a little bit boring. I cannot share that point of view. I think we have to insist that COPUOS and its two subcommittees is the only multilateral fora under the auspices of the United Nations where we can discuss all issues, technological, scientific, legal, all aspects of peaceful uses of outer space. So I'm going to try to make a very short chronological presentation of how we have been working in dark and quiet skies in COPUOS. So if possible to see next slide, I will appreciate. And even you have there a chronological line. And I would like to go to the next slide and to insist that everything started in 2020. So I think we have a goal. If we can see the next slide, please. We can, everything started in 2020 during the 50th session of the technical subcommittee. And I think that in only these 4 years, we have been able to call the attention about dark and quiet skies. And we did it all together with a great support of all regional groups. So everything started, as I said before, with a technical presentation by Piero Benvenuti about the impact of mega constellations of communication satellites on astronomy. And there were two major keys in this presentation. One thing is the importance of technical report. We have to bear in mind that this is a technical subcommittee, and it is very important to have facts about the issues we are discussing, so we can scope the problem and how to mitigate and resolve it. And secondly, Piero was also highlighting the concerns about light pollution. In this sense, I would like to make clear that we are not only referring to satellite constellations, but there are some other light which is affecting dark and quiet skies, which is, for instance, artificial night light. But I think this is not the point today, so maybe we can discuss that some other day. So next slide, please. On the 58th session of the STSC, it was possible to have a first working paper, as Piero said, during the general exchange of views. And this working paper was submitted at that time by Chile, Ethiopia, Jordan, Slovakia, Spain, and the International Astronomical Union. As Piero mentioned before, we have a lot of positive comments, 18 positive comments, and it was possible to have a specific agenda item for the next session of the STSC. On that occasion, we have a new conference room paper that at that time was submitted by Austria, Chile, the Dominican Republic, Slovakia, Spain, and the International Astronomical Union, the European Southern Observatory, and the SKO, the Square Kilometer Array Observatory. Here we have the big achievement of introducing a specific agenda item, and the title of this presentation, which was Protecting the Dark and Quiet Sky, was positively commented by 25 delegations. That is to say, 7 delegations more than on the last occasion, and we were also able to have a specific agenda item for the next meeting of the subcommittee. Furthermore, I have to say that during the subcommittee, it is normal to have a dedicated symposium to study the relation between the industry and the subcommittee. And on that year, it was decided that the symposium was going to focus on dark and quiet skies. And after the symposium, I think we can get 2 main consequences or results. The first one is the need to mitigate sky pollution, and the second one to encourage the collaboration between all actors. And when I say all actors, I mean not only astronomers and scientists, but also the satellite operators who are also very involved in this debate. Furthermore, it was clear after the symposium that it's not only a matter of adapting national laws or national measures, which are very necessary, but also that we need international cooperation, and maybe we have to start thinking about working on future guidelines about protection of dark and quiet skies. On a national level, I would like to say that during the symposium, the under-director of the Instituto Astrofísico de La Palma, Casiana Muñoz, made a presentation on our space law that was approved in 1992. So I think that Spain, we can consider Spain as a pioneer on the regulation of light, radioelectric, atmospheric, and aerial routes pollution, and we are trying to find ways to mitigate this kind of pollution, and we appreciate the work that we can do with all of you all together. So we were very encouraged by these positive results in that subcommittee. So during the 60th session of the subcommittee in 2023, we decided it was the right moment to submit a new conference room paper that was presented by Chile, Slovakia, Bulgaria, Dominican Republic, Peru, South Africa, Spain, the International Astronomical Union, the ISO, and the SKO. Here, the objective was double: to have a permanent agenda item on dark and quiet skies, if not possible permanent, because as Piero was mentioning before, the agenda is already very busy, but at least 3 years, not to have to approve it every single year, and finally also to create a group of friends. I have to say that there were a lot of support coming from all regional groups. The debates were very interesting, but unfortunately, as mentioned also before, we worked for consensus, and consensus was not possible at that time. So we have to postpone the decision of having an agenda item to the commission that was going to take place in June this year. But the main topic of this conference room paper are three, as I see it. So the first one is that astronomy is instrumental for the discovery of new space technologies and applications, that astronomy is helping to the sustainable use of space. And third one is that this conference room paper and dark and quiet skies are not against anyone. We are just looking for ways to cooperate and collaborate. That has been very positive until now, and we insist that we need a way forward. So if we can see the next slide, on the 60th session of COPWAS, we were working very hard, a big number of delegations. I think all delegations, except one or two, were very involved in this issue, which is cross-cutting, and all regionals group were in favor of having an agenda item dedicated specifically to dark and quiet skies, and also to create this group of friends. Unfortunately, because of the rule of consensus and because of the political situation that Piero was mentioning before, it was not possible to reach consensus, and then we will have to decide on the next subcommittee if it's possible to have a specific agenda item. I would like to remark two things, that the subcommittee is a scientific and technical one. It is not a political subcommittee, so we have to focus on these aspects. And second one is that even if we were not able to reach an agreement to have a specific agenda item, still we have an agenda item for the general exchange of views, and I invite all possible delegations taking the floor on that agenda item to speak loud and clear about dark and quiet skies. If we can see the next slide, I want to say also that there have been many achievements in this time. Some of them were also led by the CPS, like you can see there on the slide, reduce the reflectivity of satellites, or when they provide, or well, if you can see the next slide, please, Mila, I think I'm going too fast. Some private companies also provide accurate positional prediction of the satellites, or even the switch off the radio senders when they are overflying radio observatories. So I think because we cannot have this agenda item, the idea now is to have a group of friends, an initiative that Chile and Spain is leading with the support of many other states. And we are happy to say that we already have a few states that have decided to join this group of friends. And now I would like to give the floor back to Mila, who is going to introduce this initiative. Thank you very much to all of you for listening to me. Thank you.
Yes, do you hear? Yes, okay. Well, let me talk to you very briefly about the group of friends. The idea, this is of course plan B, right? Because since we didn't get the agenda item that we wanted, nor the expert group that we originally proposed, we look for other venues to try to continue this work that we have started. Why COPWAS? Because COPWAS is an entry point to the UN for this matter. There might be others, but this one is a very substantive entry point, and we think that it's really important that we continue and reinforce our efforts there. The group of friends, as Piero said, is nothing unknown in the UN. There are many group of friends, so it's safe ground, so to speak. It's informal. So the difference between our original idea of having an expert group and a group of friends is that an expert group is the result of a decision from COPIUS. So it's a child from COPIUS. A group of friends is an informal get-together of some interested member states and observers to move matters of interest for them forward in coordinated manner. So it's not really a child from COPIUS, it's more a cousin, a relative. It's voluntary, so nobody has to be part of the group of friends, and you don't require any financial contribution to be part of the group of friends. And here I would also like to stress that we didn't get the agenda item, but I think, and it is sad and somehow it's frustrating when you work so hard for something and then it scrambles in the last minute. But the positive part from it was also a gain in a way, because not only the subcommittee in February, but also the committee in June, they spent the whole week discussing about dark and quiet skies. So there is no delegate in that room that doesn't know about dark and quiet skies. So congratulations to you, because you have moved governments, which are not easy to move, to support this cause. And I think this is a real success. So congratulations to you, and also to your representatives that are in the room, Piero, I see, and Federico, Connie, and Andy. So, well, I continue. So what can a group of friends do? Actually, the same that we wanted to do in an expert group. An expert group was refused because it entails the participation of private industry. Okay, and for some member states, they see COPIUS as a primarily intergovernmental body, and the fact that you bring people from the industry, they didn't like that. They offer us to have a working group instead, but a working group, which is also an institution from COPIUS, a working group excludes private sector. And for this discussion, we thought it is important to have the industry, the academia, the private sector, etc. So how we see this is that a group of friends would recreate the expert group that we thought in an informal way, in the margins of COPIUS, but we can come back to COPIUS through the channels that COPIUS has. So it can do all of this exactly as an expert group. And we have the expertise inclusion that we wanted. So, and in COPIUS, we have at least, this is just food for thought, we have at least 3 types of actors that we need. Governments, scientists, you, the industry, we need them all. They have different motivations, all of them, different audiences, etc. But it actually doesn't matter as long as we either share the same concern or we get a gain, a benefit for all of these actors, right? So we have to make a case that this is not only for astronomers. There might be another concern that tackle these other actors. For instance, what about the satellite operators? What about states that also are concerned that so many satellites might have a collision and this would escalate or could escalate interstate conflict? So we have to find ways to involve the actors, because the rules and ways of COPIUS is consensus. So we need them on board. And I think that better governance of space is something very dear for many actors. So this would be a game for all. So at this moment in Copius, there are many other ways to tackle this problem, but in Copius it's important that we are carefully enough not to play these actors against each other, because we need them all. And we have to come then with a constructive and solution-oriented approach. Well, and as I said, we work in this group of friends. We propose technical solutions. We propose ways to tackle this. For instance, I'm very interested and find very interested the approach that Rafael Moro presented the other day about creating standards, because what we want is to have an impact on behavior. This is what we want at the end. Our final goal is to have a change in behavior. So we have to decide how do we get there? It might be a resolution, but I think maybe trying to get some standard, some mitigation solutions might be the way to do this. Since this is a technical subcommittee and not legal subcommittee, we might have to change the word, maybe not say norm standards, that wouldn't fly, but something that is more digestible for the technical subcommittee. And we come back then to Copius with the mechanism and formats that Copius already have. Conference room paper, as we did in the past, technical presentations that we can coordinate, side events that we can also coordinate, this type of things. And we also continue and put efforts for the agenda item. And this is particularly important for the group of friends, because as Natalie explained, the agenda item in which we will discuss the agenda item is only open for state members, for member states. So the group of friends would be a channel for observers to have indirect participation in that discussion. So in short, we put all this knowledge together and we bring it back to Copius through the available channels of Copius. Well, and so far confirmed to join the group of friends have, well, Chile and Spain, of course, South Africa, Slovakia, Italy, Switzerland, Luxembourg, United Kingdom, and the permanent observers of IAU, ISO, and SCEO. So if you haven't heard the name of your country, you have to go to and knock a door. Thank you very much. This is my propaganda slide with the Chilean side.
All right, I just want to remind people who are online to get your questions ready, because we have one more speaker, and after that we'll have our Q&A. And anyone here that may want to put questions on Slack that they don't want to forget, that would be great too. Do you want to sit now? No, I'm going to have one more speaker. All right, so our last speaker is Ashley Vanderlei. And I just want to mention that she is the acting senior science advisor for strategy and engagement at the National Science Foundation. And of course, I mentioned her title, but I'll just restate it. Correlated National Actions, the case of the U.S. Federal Communications Commission and the National Science Foundation. So Ashley, are you online? No. Can we put Ashley online, please?
Can you hear me?
Oh, there she is. Okay, thank you very much. And Ashley, do you have a presentation?
I do.
Okay, all right.
Is that visible?
No, just a minute. Let's put that on. No, it's the other one. Mhm. Okay. All right. Go ahead, Ashley.
Great, thank you. It's an honor to be able to speak. I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but I am at the Working Party 7D in Geneva that Federico spoke about, but happy to be joining remotely. I wanted to just mention really quickly, I'm going to present a little bit about the National Science Foundation's response, and we really advocate for astronomy and for science services within the United States and to our regulators. So I wanted to mostly highlight in this slide that in addition to standing up a new funding program to offer research and development funds, we have actually expanded the number of spectrum managers on our team because this is such a challenge, and officially extended the responsibilities and duties of the Spectrum Management Office to not only include radio, but also the optical and infrared impacts. So I wanted to highlight that our team in the past few years really has grown. So a lot of these efforts are also by colleagues, Jonathan Williams, John Chapin, and we have 2 new colleagues that have just joined this year, Josh Redding and Sarah Marie Bruno. Additionally, at NSF, this is not just a challenge in astronomy, there's engineering and computer science challenges. So this has been a NSF-wide effort where we actually gather once a month and get expertise across all the directorates. So just wanted to mention that in terms of the approach, that it really does extend beyond just the astronomy division. And so I think for other nations as well, as you think about tackling this challenge, it's been very productive that we work with our computer science colleagues who are, working on the next generation wireless. If we can kind of bring those concerns for astronomy into the earliest stages of research and development, we think that really can, help influence future outcomes and decisions. So in today's talk, I really wanted to just highlight some things that have happened in the regulatory environment within the United States. And for that, wanted to highlight that the international rules, especially for the radio that Federico mentioned at the ITU, that's brought down to a national level. So we have kind of incorporated that in the United States in sort of a separate rules that mostly match the international rules, but sometimes there's a few key differences. And this is a place where other countries' administrations can also add some additional rules. We have 2 regulators in the United States. NTIA helps to manage federal spectrum, which includes scientific services like astronomy, and then FCC for commercial uses. And so NSF is able to provide advice into the process to both regulators through an interdepartment radio advisory committee. And so this is where we're able to provide input and suggestions that hopefully get incorporated, and you'll see they have been incorporated by the FCC into rulemakings, which we're very excited to share. Here's an example of how the international rules have been interpreted in the United States. So this is just one example in the fixed satellite service from 10.7 to 12.7. It is adjacent to a primary radio astronomy band from 10.68 to 10.7 gigahertz. And in the US, we have this little footnote, US 131. And this US 131 footnote requires that companies that are operating in this fixed satellite service are required to achieve a mutually acceptable agreement with a list of radio telescopes. So these radio telescopes are all owned and operated by the National Science Foundation. So this is where we stepped in and began coordinating with any company that was looking for an authorization from the FCC. So it does not have to just be a US company. It could also be a company just looking for landing rights in the United States that need an authorization. And so that was kind of the opening to begin coordination. So from this, in 2019, we executed the first coordination agreement with SpaceX. And this agreement really focused on the radio coordination, the piece of the radio astronomy, ensuring that they met international standards in that primary radio astronomy band. But we also began to ask them to take voluntary steps, if there's ways that they could help us to improve radio astronomy in the entire band without affecting their service and their legal rights to actually access that band. So that was the first coordination agreement. But then thanks to all of the excellent work from the astronomy community, both the IAUS within the United States, but especially the 2 Dark and Quiet Skies conferences that came to a great list of suggested recommendations for companies, we revised this statement in 2022 So we have an updated agreement with SpaceX that explicitly includes their commitment to mitigate the impact of optical and infrared on ground-based astronomical facilities. So in our coordination agreement, we explicitly mention a number of the recommendations that came from Dark and Quiet Skies. So again, thank you for the reports from the first two conferences. So we just pulled that directly and requested, and they committed to this, to work towards trying to reduce the optical brightness to the 7th visual magnitude or fainter, working on the physical design changes, attitude maneuvering, maintaining lower orbital elevations, and providing their orbital information publicly, high precision, so that we can work on coordination. So with this, we also put them in touch with NSF's NOAR lab. That's where Connie does fantastic work, and sort of as the technical point of contact to start doing a lot of the exchange of technical information. And so that was extremely helpful. So this was begun to be worked on, and then a requirement for this coordination in the optical was added to SpaceX's authorization. So it's now a requirement that they have this in their license, and they have to report back to the FCC once a year on the progress that they've made towards reaching these goals. After this agreement was executed, we were really excited to see that the FCC was responding to input, and they similarly have required a mutually acceptable coordination agreement to mitigate the impacts of satellites on optical ground-based astronomy for Amazon Kuiper, and also for OneWeb. I have the text up here in the authorization for Kuiper, but would note that it's very, very similar language also in the OneWeb authorization. And so here you can see the text where, again, by the 1st of January of each year, they'll be required to report back to the FCC whether they've reached a coordination agreement with NSF and what steps they've actually taken, including darkening, deflecting the light away, maneuvering the satellite, and providing the high precision orbital information to astronomers. So I think all of this is helpful, and I will just highlight that we, to the best of our ability, put requirements suggested based on, again, what was coming out of Dark and Quiet Skies, and we were hearing from the community. And so as you continue to develop what those best practice guidance are, those are the kind of things that we'll look to incorporate in these coordination agreements as we move forward. So these were the three biggest satellite constellations, but we also heard from the community that there's also a concern of aggregate from all the smaller number of satellite constellations and how that can have an impact. So that was also communicated to the FCC, and we're also very happy to report that the FCC, listened to that input, and as of August 31st, so just a little over a month ago, they issued 2 new authorizations to small constellations, ISI and Planet Labs, and these now also include a required coordination with NSF as a condition of the grant, with, again, very similar kinds of language where they have to report back to the FCC if they've reached a coordination agreement and what explicit things they are doing to reduce the impact. So we find this to be, a very helpful step, that it's really becoming standard practice, not just for the large constellations, but also the smaller ones, to require this coordination. And again, as we get more and more, satellite companies looking for authorizations and coming to coordinate, it's going to be fantastic to be able to provide the information back that we hear from the community. What should we be requesting in these coordinations, and what's possible, and having that feedback from the community when companies actually launch satellites with mitigations if they see a positive impact. So we know Kuiper, for example, will be launching 2 satellites coming up here shortly. So it'll be great to get feedback from the community on if the mitigations have worked on the satellite that they are launching with the mitigations, and then to see how that progresses. So these are the agreements in process. And, again, we'd be happy to speak with anyone from, other administrations or other regulators that want to see more details of the language in these authorizations. There was some great talks already on COPUS and the ITU. I just wanted to add a few more things about the ITU. that are helpful. Again, I'm here at Working Party 7D, and it's completely driven by contributions. So if there's ideas folks have, it can either be submitted through an organization like SKAO, which has done a fantastic job, or through an administration in member state. One report that Federico actually was instrumental in making sure an update got submitted to 7D was a report on the characteristics of radio quiet zones around the world. So this was approved and is now the official document at the ITU. So this is a fantastic resource. And then from this, we are actually proposing, we first submitted it to the US, and I think we now have support in region 2, so South America, Central America, the Caribbean, and North America as well, that we're asking the ITU to create a database of radio quiet zones. And so this would be useful for operators of global systems to try to do what they can to voluntarily coordinate with the radio quiet zones, because it's a lot of work for all of these companies to be able to find out where are the radio telescopes of interest if they want to be helpful and how they could do that. So we are really hopeful in November at the Radio Communication Assembly that we can get broad support for this to pass, and actually requested the ITU to form this database. So just in summary, I wanted to share with you today and appreciate the opportunity from the leaders of the IAU Center. We do feel like the FCC has done an excellent job taking the expressed concerns into account, requiring these authorizations. They've also been supportive of efforts, for example, the proposal for the radio quiet zone database. But we do rely on the astronomy community input on what that best practice guidance should be when we actually get down to executing the coordination agreement. So all of the work of the astronomers is very important, and we really are going to be looking for updates to any guidance that's coming out of the IAU Center. And then just in summary, again, we've seen quite a few of the large satellite companies really taking great efforts to work to mitigate. Again, including Kuiper, who you all know is co-chair of the IAU Industry Hub, again, launching a satellite without mitigations and one with mitigation. So we're really excited to see that. We are in the final stages of signing a coordination agreement with Kuiper. We think that will happen in the next couple months. And then again, we've seen some great steps by SpaceX and OneWeb. And then those two other companies, we've already begun to initiate some conversations about what steps can be taken. So again, we are kind of pleased with this progress and happy to share with you. And we would love to talk. If anyone has questions, please reach out to our Spectrum group. And so with that, I'll pass it back to Connie. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ashley, very, very much. If you could stay online, that would be really great. We're going to have a Q&A right now. So I would like to ask the four speakers that are here to come up on stage and take a seat. And I hope you guys are all ready with your questions. Okay. And then if you would stay just a few minutes, 1 minute more after the question and answer period is done around, I hope, well, we'll see when it's done, but we have just a couple of announcements to make afterwards. Okay. So does anyone have a question for any of our panelists here? Yes. The mic.
Thank you. This is Benjamin Winkel speaking. First of all, thanks a lot to all of you for the fantastic session. Special shout out to Ashley in Geneva for being dutiful while I enjoy the island. I should have been there too, but okay. I would have a comment to Federico's talk. He mentioned the proposals for new radio astronomy agenda items. And as you know, these two were submitted by Europe and Africa. But I can only ask all of you to get in touch with your own administrations. If you are not from Europe or from Africa, please talk to your own administrations wherever you are from and try to convince them to support these two initiatives. It's extremely important. Without all administrations agreeing at the WRC, this won't fly.
That's a comment. Does anyone have any question? Yes.
This is Andy Lawrence. I think this is a fairly simple question, I hope, that I just haven't understood. And this could be for Federico, or, I think, or for Ashley, possibly. Once you have this giant allocation table, how do you get the actual permission to operate? Is that then entirely done by the national regulators? Or is there a sort of double jeopardy of the ITU? You have to get approved by FCC and then the ITU? How do you get actual permission to use a channel?
Yes, yeah, there. I can try to start, and then Ashley, maybe you can come in if you want. I guess you're talking about satellites, right, Andy? Yeah, all right. Because if it's a terrestrial service, it's much simpler because it's an administration, national administration, who decides how the radio spectrum is used based on the radio regulations, but can be just a national issue. As long as they don't produce interference to neighboring countries, should be all right. That's how the radio regulations work. But if you're talking about satellites, because the satellites is basically a global system, the ITU has a very clear process, let's say, to file the satellite filings, like for example, from the FCC. So if I want to file a satellite from the US, for example, I need to go and talk to the FCC. The FCC sends the filings to the ITU, and then there's a process that is called satellite coordination, where the satellite is registered at the ITU, and then there is a period where other countries can comment on that filing if there is interference issues, right? So if there is a one country proposing to use a satellite that is going to produce interference with some other service, for example, another country can go to the ITU and they enter into bilateral coordinations between countries.
The only thing that I might add to that. Can you hear me? Yeah. What I might add is that the bands that you see in the international table are allocations to a particular service. So generally, I mean, aside from the details Federico told you about satellites, you must be kind of operating according to what services are in that band. And so when the ITU generally sets up those rules, for example, you know, the fixed service might have an allocation. And so that doesn't give them the authorization to transmit, which, as you mentioned, it does have to be by the individual administrations, but the fixed must be in that allocation. For example, the fixed can't be in a radio astronomy allocation or a satellite. So it kind of gives you the broad highway that different types of services operate in the different bands with basic constraints to try to protect other services. And then beyond that, you know, once you know, if it's the satellite, as Federico said, there's additional rules for them to actually apply to the ITU and do some coordination, but then to actually get the landing rights, you know, in a particular country, they do also have to then apply, you know, with that particular administration. So it is kind of a two-step process, but the ITU focuses much more on the services allowed in a particular allocation. So if you wanted to expand something, that's where, you know, if the mobile service wants to move into a fixed satellite service, that's where they would have to do all of the studies at the ITU first.
Right, thank you.
Yes, Richard. Please state your name when you get the mic so that people online especially can know who you are. Richard's over here in the blue shirt. This shirt, yeah.
Hi, Richard Green from the CPS. This is slightly off topic, but only slightly, in that the Artemis Accords for the moon have muddied the waters on the Moon Treaty and the OST. Have they also muddied the waters for the ITU, extending its authority to operations on the moon, or are the ITU rules simply assumed to apply?
Ashley, do you want to comment, or I can?
Maybe I'll start and you can correct me, Federico. I think the ITU recognizes that this is a gray area. So to date, people have been using the Space Research Service for things at the moon. But we do recognize that there's probably additional rules that are needed. So there are active study questions in Working Party 7D. We have an active question to explore, what frequencies are needed and to see if there are updates. So for example, recommendation 769 for limits, should that be extended to the moon or just apply to the Earth, and do we need a new recommendation? So it has been recognized that the ITU may need to kind of expand on a number of recommendations. And so this is going to be a lot of ongoing work in the next 4 years. Federico.
No, I think you covered it very well. There is regulation on the ITU for the moon, but I think there's much more work to do. Sure.
Okay, we have a question at the back. That's Matt Isidro.
Thank you. Matthew Isidro from SKO. This is a question about Coprios, so it's mostly for Mila and Jose Manuel. Piero referred to the discussions that were had at Coprios and the opposition of a couple of delegations to the agenda item that was discussed. Aside from the initiative about the group of friends and technical presentations and side events, I mean, these seem maybe unlikely to change a delegation's position on their own. So are you aware of ongoing discussions and conversations between the Copios meetings with those specific delegations to try and come to a compromise? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, of course, we always have informal conversations and consultations in the period between the meetings. The ideal situation is we come to the meeting with something that is already a accord, or we get some kind of agreement. And we did that in the past, and we will continue doing this. Yes, of course.
Oh my, could I take a prerogative of taking one online question and then, okay, good. Chesney Pugh from the University of Texas at McDonald Observatory asks, Ashley, do you expect an agreement to be required with AST for Blue Walker as it moves out of experimental?
That's a great question. And I would say that the precedent is moving in that direction for new satellite authorizations. And so that is something that NSF would explicitly ask for if there's an opportunity to look to coordinate. One thing that I think would be helpful input from the community is when we look at constellations with smaller number of satellites, is there a different threshold that's acceptable? So we're definitely aiming for 7th magnitude with the very large constellations where there's always going to be a satellite in the sky. If there's an operator that has fewer satellites, is there acceptable different limits? So that would be input that would be helpful for, potentially new constellations that might have a lot smaller number of satellites that we would love to get input on.
Thank you, Ashley. Okay, I see far back. Would you like to state your name?
Thank you. My name is Steve Mermina. I wanted to respond to Richard's comment and then make a subsidiary comment. I'm one of the attorneys that's in the room now, and there's a common joke among lawyers that if you have 2 attorneys in the room, you probably have 3 different opinions. But responding to Richard's comment about the Artemis Accords may have muddied the water with the Moon Agreement and the Outer Space Treaty, I just wanted to make clear to everybody in the room that legally speaking, I'm just speaking from a lawyer's point of view now, there's nothing in the Artemis Accords that has any legal impact on the other 2 treaties. The Artemis Accords is a non-binding legal document. It's only a series of more or less unilateral statements by country how they want to implement best practices in lunar exploration. But legally, there's no way at all, as a matter of law, that the Artemis Accords can impact the Outer Space Treaty or the Moon Agreement. The second comment I wanted to make was that Ashley's presentation from the FCC was regarding the FCC and the license restrictions is spot on. The best way to effectuate behavioral change with industry. I think, just personally speaking, that will be far more effective than a multi-year process of involving the UN or the ICJ or other bodies. But if you want industry to take steps, then go to your government regulators. For us, it's the FCC in the US. Get them to put license restrictions on the operators to protect radio astronomy. And that's an immediate way you can effectuate change, not waiting till after thousands of satellites have been launched and trying to get some very vague statement from the UN. So those are my two comments. Thanks.
Can I respond quickly to that? That there's one thing that works very well for radio, right? Because you have to get a license to put your radio beams on the ground, let's say, so you can control what operators do. But in the optical, there can be challenges if there are other countries that are operating big constellations. And for example, they don't have a license in the US. Right? So while it's the best tool we have right now, which I completely agree, Steve, I think there is a challenge in there that even in the radio, if we talk about unintentional radiation, as we were talking before, it's also something that you cannot cover with those kind of agreements. But so far, it's the best agreement we have. I agree.
Okay. So I saw a few more hands up before. Anyone else have a question here? That's right. Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Connie. Fred Watson, Australian government. I'm really interested in what the ultimate fate of the group of friends might be in the event of the agenda item getting up. You know, I had a question similar to Matt's there. What happens if those recalcitrant nations have a change of heart and suddenly we're faced with an agenda item and the possibility of an expert group? One of the things that you said, Mila, in your presentation was that one of the aims of the group of friends is to avoid duplication of other groups. And if we suddenly had an expert group and an agenda item, would that be the end of the group of friends?
Thank you. This is a very good question. So as we see it, if we get the agenda item, we will need also some coordination and substance to put into this agenda item discussion. And I think the group of friends will have a job to do for this agenda item. So I don't think that that we should dissolve the group of friends when we get the agenda item, if eventually we get the agenda item. And at the same time, the possibility of this agenda item starting is 2025, right? The technical subcommittee. So we can, with a group of friends, start working now. So that we use this time that we have, use the mechanism of copies that are already there. And if we have an agenda item, we put substance into that agenda item. The expert group, because the group of friends somehow recreates the expert group that we don't have. And I don't think that in the short term that we will get to an expert group. So I think since this possibility is, the agenda item, I think is somehow touchable, and but the expert group, I think, won't fly. And maybe I can also say that the good part of, well, we got this objection, this blocking, but none of the two states that blocked the issue were against the issue itself. They wanted something different, or they didn't agree with the nature of our proposal, but they were not against the item itself, which is a good thing. If they were against it, it would be the end of discussion. So we still have room for maneuver. Thank you.
Okay,
Connie?
yes.
If I may say
If I
something,
may, just a small comment that was not mentioned up to now. Chile and Spain, when they set up the proposal of a group of friends, asked the CPS to act as a technical secretariat of the group of friends. And of course, we accepted very enthusiastically. And so we will provide the background support for communication among the group of friends and a working space where we can put document and exchange views in a effective way.
All right, so we do have a number of questions online. Oh, yes. Please, Dr. Go ahead.
I would like to add something if possible. I think that having the agenda item cannot be the end of the group of friends. It's just the beginning of the group of friends. It could, we are working now to have this agenda item and this group of friends both at the same time. The group of friends has to coordinate our positions, have to work together to have working papers, conference room paper, technical presentations, side events. So the debate, when there is an agenda item, a specific agenda item, will be more vivid, more rich, and we can mitigate this problem in the best way through the cooperation of all of us. Thank you.
Well, we have impending lunch period now, but do we have any further questions from the audience? Mhm. We do have a number of very good questions for that are online. But is it all right if I ask one more that's online? Because we have an upvote, we have 5 votes on one of these things. So for Ashley, this last question, is that okay? That other people can comment on as well. Companies are making commitments to the NSF and signing agreements. However, is there a limit to the number of initiatives proposing and launching satellite constellations? How many satellite constellations are acceptable and how are demands prioritized?
So currently at this point, I am not aware that there are limits in low Earth orbit to the number of satellites. And this connects with, other questions related to space debris and long-term sustainability. IAUS has done a lot of work on long-term sustainability. This is one of the key concerns that NASA has actually raised. You can see some of their inputs publicly, their concerns about space debris and the impact on the International Space Station. So I think this is an active area. If there, at some point will be limits. If there's limits that we should suggest from the astronomy community, this is a place that we would be very eager to see input from the astronomy community, quantitative assessments of, at what point you get to, too many satellite constellations that you don't have a small impact on astronomy. You really, is it 40,000 where we have a 5% impact, but when you get up to 80,000, the impact grows to a point that it really has substantially hindered science, and we should request some kind of limit. At this point, we haven't seen enough quantitative scientific assessment of what those limits should be at various levels to be able to provide that to the regulators. But I do think if work was done, that's the kind of input that would be helpful to feed back to the regulators if there was, some concrete limits that could be suggested. But at this point for astronomy, again, we haven't seen limits aside from kind of the 7th magnitude, trying to keep as many satellites as possible below that. The aggregate is a big question and how that impacts things. So again, we would just continue to encourage the IAU Center and astronomers to work on these problems. And then again, there, of course, will probably be some interface with long-term sustainability questions and space debris that would also provide, a feedback loop. And we think it is inevitable. There are slots for geo satellites. So there's limited number of slots that the ITU actually handles, and people have a wait list to get on it. So we do think at some point there probably, will be a similar concept, but there's so many options in low Earth orbit that hasn't actually, been approached yet.
just a quick comment on that, on the numbers. Remember yesterday's presentation from Veronique, and she was explaining that the ITU looks at the use of space orbits as to transmit signals from a certain position in space, right? So if you put 100,000 satellites in low Earth orbit, and you can prove to the ITU that there's no harmful interference with any other operator, then the ITU will not say anything. It's good. So that's the big conversation that's going on right now at the ITU and shortly at the WRC 23. Although it's not an agenda item, there will be conversations on this matter.
Well, I think we should not stand between you and your lunch. So I'm going to thank, I'd like all of us to thank, please, the panelists here and the panelists online. One more time.